Old-time sailors dreaded the powerful currents that sweep between these islands. But this ship is making best speed with all sails set. She bears a famous name, and like her famous predecessor, she carries a crew of scientists and naturalists. She's taking them to one of the most exciting and romantic destinations in the world.
Here, both in time and space, we seem to be brought somewhat near to that great fact, that mystery of mysteries, the first appearance of new beings on this earth.
That was how Charles Darwin recorded the impact the Galapagos Islands made on him when he visited them towards the start of the last century. The early navigators called them the Enchanted Isles because winds and currents made them so hard to find, and once found, so hard to sail away from. They're the Galapagos, 600 miles out in the Pacific Ocean from the coast of Ecuador. Her sails furled now, she enters the shelter of an inlet on one of the 10 main islands in the Galapagos archipelago. Unlike the earlier vessel that was to make the same name world famous, she's independent of calms and currents as she cruises into her anchorage under power. The name proudly blazoned on her side is Beagle. Beagle was the Royal Navy brig which brought Charles Darwin to the Galapagos in 1835. It was the wildlife which Darwin observed on his visit that was to form the basis of his revolutionary theories on the origin of species, in short, on the whole process of evolution. The modern Beagle has its Darwin connections too. It belongs to the Darwin Research Station, which carries on the sort of scientific work Charles Darwin would consider vital were he alive and in the islands today. In fact, the visit from which Darwin deduced so much only lasted 5 weeks. His observations on the unique creatures of the Galapagos started from the moment he stepped ashore.
The rocks on the coast abounded with great black lizards, between 3 and 4 feet long. Their limbs and strong claws are admirably adapted for crawling over the rugged and fissured masses of lava. In such situations, a group of these hideous reptiles may often be seen on the black rocks a few feet above the surface, basking in the sun with outstretched legs.
Darwin's hideous reptiles, as he realized full well, were marine iguanas, the only lizard in the world to adapt itself to living and feeding in the sea. The weird volcanic landscape, the strange vegetation, and even stranger creatures to which the islands had given birth, were already suffering from man's onslaught when Darwin visited the archipelago over 100 years ago. Alas, the process has accelerated since then. What a tragedy it would be if Galapagos wildlife ever became as extinct as the long-vanished dinosaurs.
This is the Dinosaur Hall in the Natural History Museum in London. What you see here is only a small sample of an immense collection of exhibits of all kinds. The only snag is that every one of them is dead, Most of them are either stuffed or skeletons, and a good many of them extinct. Well, this is certainly one way of preserving the creatures who have been sharing this planet with us for millions of years, but I'm quite sure that anyone, even remotely interested in animals, would much rather see them alive than in their natural environment. Surely the marine iguanas you saw just now are more interesting and enjoyable than this stuffed specimen here. And even though a live Galapagos tortoise is not much more active than this one, it is at least a great deal more fascinating. The Galapagos Islands have a unique collection of wild creatures, but unless something is done about their protection now, they're likely to end up as so many stuffed specimens in the museums of the world, reminders of mankind's ruthless selfishness. This problem of the conservation of wildlife is not peculiar to the Galapagos, but these islands and their animal inhabitants have a very special significance, as you will soon see. After an official visit to Mexico in 1964, I was fortunate enough to be able to spend a short time on some of the Galapagos Islands. It was an experience I shall never forget. It was like stepping into an enchanted world where man and beast can still coexist without fear. The first sign that things are different on these islands is the behavior of the seabirds. Pelicans go on with their fishing with a complete disregard for interested spectators. Of course, many seabirds, like the blue-footed booby, are not exclusive to the Galapagos. Seabirds, like sailors, get around quite a bit, but these seem to have fallen under the spell of the island. Apart from seabirds, most of the creatures you see are peculiar to these islands. This makes things much easier for the amateur naturalist because it's quite safe to call them a Galapagos something or other. These marine iguanas hardly need the prefix Galapagos. They don't occur anywhere else in the world, and no telescopic lenses are needed here. The landscape has a peculiar quality all of its own. There is no rain to erode the blue-black lava flows, so it all looks just like solidified mud. Around the shores, the Pacific surf has torn out bays and caverns where sea lions make their homes. Naturally, they are a special subspecies of sea lion, known, needless to say, as the Galapagos sea lion. Cows are delightfully feminine creatures with melting eyes and sleek figures. And like so many humans, they obviously enjoy basking in the sun. But their habit of sleeping with their heads underwater is something few, if any, humans would choose to do. They're also polygamous, which means that the harem can sleep peacefully. But the lord and master has to keep up a constant offshore patrol, lest some covetous intruder should attempt to snitch one of his more flighty wives. As in human holiday resorts, life need not be one long snooze. There are also more active pleasures. I should imagine that sea lions like these off Hood Island were surf riding long before humans ever thought of it. It's rather sobering to think that scenes like this are only possible because man was such a recent intruder into this natural paradise. A short walk along the shore is enough to reveal the extraordinary diversity of Galapagos creatures. No need for hides or for stalking here, and nothing is behind bars. That's a little blue heron, a Galapagos blue heron naturally, and here comes a bright red lava crab. One small tidal pool reveals something unique at every corner. A heron looking for victims, and a crab feeding frantically as though its food supply of green seaweed might run out at any moment. Sea-going lizards are odd enough, so a diet of algae growing on the lava should come as no surprise. These spindly red crabs look faintly menacing, but I suppose familiarity explains the bland indifference of this sea lion pup as a crab walks by almost at the end of its nose. These leather-skinned iguanas lying on the black volcanic sand hardly seem to notice the crab's progress. Either that, or they're very tolerant. The lava crabs are frequently the victims in the tidal pool drama. After these squabbling and raucous voices of the herons and lava gulls, a more domestic scene. A flightless cormorant brings his lady love what is, I imagine, the cormorant equivalent of a bunch of roses, a sprig of seaweed. Galapagos cormorants have existed so long without enemies that they've abandoned the laborious business of flying ages ago. As a result, their stubby wings, like the human little toe, no longer serve any useful purpose. Any change in the natural environment could make them extremely vulnerable. Considering the Galapagos are nearly on the equator, you would hardly expect to find penguins. In fact, the water is surprisingly cold because the Humboldt current sweeps the icy Antarctic waters up the west coast of South America and around the islands. This combination of tropical climate and cold water produces the unique situation of penguins and flamingos living next to each other. Those are only some of the scenes which I saw during my visit to these islands. With proper conservation and sensible management, these remarkable islands could become one of the most fascinating attractions to the growing number of people all over the world who are interested in natural history. But see for yourself and listen to the extraordinary story of these islands since they were first seen by man just over 400 years ago.
The Galapagos are a comparatively recent eruption on the Earth's surface. Between 1 and 3 million years ago, they literally exploded out of the bed of the Pacific Ocean as a series of tempestuous volcanoes. Since then, the wind and weather has done little to modify their shape. On many of the islands, the blue-black lava looks almost freshly cooled. It's still unweathered and razor-sharp. Inland, small volcanic boils disfigure the island's face. On the coasts, the sea has broken into some of the volcanoes to form sheltered bays. In the million or so years since they were born, the Galapagos have received a slow trickle of creatures from South America, carried there on floating debris by the Humboldt current. Those who survived faced no competition. They evolved in ways that were entirely their own. Man didn't make his mark here until 1535. Then the Bishop of Panama, no doubt to his considerable consternation, was blown off course while on a mission to Peru. This put the Galapagos on the charts. Next came the buccaneers, who ran their pirate ships ashore to refit and pillaged the wildlife for fresh food, particularly the giant tortoises. They did worse than that. The rats escaped from their ships' holds. They put ashore goats to breed and act as future stocks of meat. Goats are more destructive than any pirate crew. In a few hundred years, they can eat even a fertile island down to bare rock. The first settlers had established themselves by the early 1800s, but the soil was too poor and the rainfall too scanty to offer much hope of success. It didn't help that many of the early settlers were political refugees and desperados. These people fell back on killing the wildlife as a means of getting food. Sometimes they killed each other. The weird landscape became the setting for some particularly mysterious murders. Then in 1835, a new invader arrived in the Galapagos, His Majesty's survey brig Beagle. She was probably the most important invader yet. She had on board a 22-year-old scientist called Charles Darwin. The Beagle's mission was to survey some of the Pacific Islands. Darwin was on board as naturalist, unpaid. What he saw on the Beagle's brief 5-week stay in the islands was to lay the foundation for his Origin of Species, published 30 years later. Darwin's theory, long since universally accepted, was that no living thing has been created ready-made. Everything, including man, has evolved. When Darwin stepped ashore from the Beagle, he was immediately struck by the fact that almost every creature on the islands was quite different from its nearest relatives anywhere else in the world. He made detailed notes on all he saw.
The marine iguana is extremely common on all the islands throughout the group and lives exclusively on the rocky sea beaches, being never found, at least I never saw one, even 10 yards inshore. The aquatic species is remarkable because it is the only existing lizard which lives on marine vegetable productions.
Darwin's observations on the seagoing habits of the marine iguana could hardly be improved upon by a modern naturalist with underwater cameras.
The nature of this lizard's food, as well as the structure of its tail and feet, absolutely prove its aquatic habits. This lizard swims with perfect ease by a serpentine movement of its body and flattened tail, the legs being motionless and closely collapsed on its sides. I do not recollect having observed the seaweed on which it feeds in any quantity on tidal rocks. I have reason to believe it grows at the bottom of the sea, at some little distance from the coast.
Darwin was absolutely right. He also noted correctly that the iguanas made for shore whenever danger threatened. In fact, this sea lion is only playing with the iguana, but the poor creature is hardly to know that. Although the iguana was in no danger from the sea lion, its instinct to make for the shore may have been conditioned by thousands of years of persecution by sharks and other big fish. Darwin observed that once on land, these reptiles seemed to have no enemies of any sort, but here, for once, he was not quite right on his facts. The non-poisonous Galapagos snake is very partial to baby iguanas. Obviously, during his short visit, Darwin didn't see the snake in action. The surprising thing is how much Darwin did manage to see. The iguanas themselves gave him a valuable clue to his later theories about evolution. He noted that the seagoing type which swarmed on the shores had plainly come from the same stock as the land iguana, who lives well away from the shoreline and follows quite a different way of life.
Some of these lizards inhabit the high and damp part of the island. It would appear as if they had been created in the center of the archipelago and then had dispersed only to a certain distance. They are ugly animals, of a yellowish-orange beneath and of a brownish-red color above. From their low facial angle, they have a singularly stupid appearance. In their movements, they are lazy and half-torpid. When not frightened, they slowly crawl along with their tails and bellies dragging on the ground. If this lizard is held and plagued with a stick, it will bite it very severely. But I caught many by the tail, and they never tried to bite me. If two are close together on the ground, they will fight and bite each other until blood is drawn.
But their fight is never to the death. It's simply to establish who is boss of a particular piece of territory. In the end, the loser always backs down and runs for it. But the main contributor to Darwin's theories was a quite different set of creatures. Surprisingly, they weren't weird monsters like this, but something you'd least expect. Darwin's finches. They're what gave him one of the main clues to his theory of evolution. He noted,
"The remaining land birds form a most singular group of finches. All are peculiar to this archipelago. One might really fancy that from an original paucity of birds, one species had been taken and modified for different ends. The most curious fact is the perfect gradation of the beaks."
since their common ancestor arrived, they've split up. They've developed different shaped beaks for different means of getting their food. Enormously heavy beaks for seed cracking, slightly lighter beaks for probing and cracking. At first, like other biologists of his day, Darwin didn't fully appreciate the significance of his finches. But he had grasped the essential truth. They were of American origin and had been modified to meet local conditions. What shattered the Victorian world when he at last came out with his theories of evolution was that up until then, even the scientists had believed that species were divinely created and had never changed since Genesis. Turning this belief upside down was, in Darwin's own words, like confessing to a murder. When it comes to finding food, Darwin's finches are much more versatile than even he suspected. The small ground finch, only the males of all species are dark by the way, specializes in pecking blood from the base of the white booby's feathers. The marine iguanas are possibly more grateful for the small ground finch's grooming. The birds are after ticks in their leathery hides, and the iguanas must be glad to get rid of them. By far the most interesting and specialized finch is one Darwin hadn't even heard of. The incredible fact is that this bird has learnt to use a tool, one of the few creatures in the world, apart from man, who can do so. The woodpecker finch has cashed in on the fact that there are no woodpeckers in the Galapagos. There are, however, plenty of insects living in rotten trees. So what do you do if you lack the sticky tongue with which a real woodpecker winkles them out? The answer is that you break off a twig or a piece of bark and probe around with it until you flush the quarry out of hiding. How the woodpecker finch ever discovered this trick in the first place, and how it became of sufficient survival value to produce a separate species, positively baffles the imagination. The point is that it enabled this bird to move in on a whole store of food exploited by no one else, and so the species thrived. Woodpecker finches use a number of different weapons. Those in the dry zone specialize in breaking off cactus spines. Higher up in the crater area, where constant mist produces a greener vegetation, the birds learn to break off twigs rather than cactus spines. At first glance, they sometimes look rather inefficient, as they keep on dropping the twig. But it's more likely that they're trying it on for size. If one stick won't reach, they go back for another one. The woodpecker finch is probably the most astonishing example of adaptation and evolution that even Darwin's islands can provide. Darwin was overwhelmed with impressions enough. One of the most vivid was the remarkable tameness of all Galapagos creatures.
I will give an account of the extreme tameness of the birds. A gun is here almost superfluous. With its muzzle, I one day pushed a hawk off a branch of a tree.
But for tameness, nothing can quite equal the Galapagos mockingbirds, which Darwin called mocking thrushes. Darwin noted their inquisitive nature.
One day, whilst I was lying down, a mocking thrush alighted on the edge of a pitcher which I held in my hand and began very quietly to sip.
Joan and Alan Root, who filmed all this for survival, had similar experiences while preparing meals at their campsite.
Go away.
As to the tameness of the land iguana, Darwin commented,
I then walked up and pulled it by the tail. It stared me in the face as if to say, "What made you do that?"
Joan Root found that she could tempt iguanas with cactus flowers and get them to feed happily out of her hand. But the trust of some creatures, especially fur seals, had already been betrayed by man. Darwin wrote,
It is surprising that they have not become wilder. These islands during the last 150 years have frequently been visited by buccaneers and whalers.
The whalers and sealers killed fur seals in thousands. Perhaps some memory of that slaughter still lingers on, for the Roots found fur seals extremely wary whenever they approached them on the shore. In the Galapagos, where almost everything is tame, fur seals are an exception. Being caught defenseless on the shore, where the sealers clubbed their ancestors to death, is something they won't risk even today. Once in the water, they feel safe. Below the surface of the ice-cold sea that surrounds the Galapagos, Alan and Joan Root found themselves accepted by fur seals and sea lions on equal terms. The seals had suffered terribly in the past from wholesale massacre by invading ships' crews. The sealers killed for fur and for profit. The pirates who raided the islands before them were searching for meat. They found it in large quantities and in a form that would keep fresh for weeks when battened down below hatches. The pirates often had to climb high into the crater uplands to collect this free supply of fresh meat. There they found the giant tortoises, and they took them aboard by the thousand to feed their crews. Darwin made copious notes about these huge reptiles.
The larger islands alone possess springs, and these are situated towards the central parts and at a considerable height. The tortoises which frequent the lower districts are therefore obliged to travel from a long distance. When the tortoise arrives at the spring, quite regardless of any spectator, he buries his head in the water and greedily swallows great mouthfuls at the rate of about 10 a minute. During the breeding season, the male utters a hoarse cry, which it is said can be heard at a considerable distance. The female never uses her voice, and the male only at these times.
Darwin never witnessed the actual mating. Few people have. The courtship of a 200-pound tortoise is in every way a resounding performance. A Hood Island tortoise. Its shell has a shape different from that of its fellows on any other island. The tortoises gave Darwin the final clue to his theory on evolution. Before he sailed, he wrote,
I have not as yet noted by far the most remarkable feature in the natural history of this archipelago. The different islands are inhabited by a different set of beings. It is the fate of most voyagers no sooner to discover what is most interesting in any locality than they are hurried from it. But I ought perhaps to be thankful that I obtained sufficient material to establish this most remarkable fact in the distribution of organic beings. Here, both in time and space, we seem to be brought somewhat near to that great fact, that mystery of mysteries, the first appearance of new beings on this earth.
The Beagle sailed away to complete its survey tour of the Pacific, taking the young naturalist with it. In the notes in his sea chest, he had a time bomb that was to blow the scientific world sky high 30 years later. But in one sense, Darwin never really left the islands. The name of Darwin lives on in the Galapagos through the work of the Charles Darwin Research Station. It's on one of the few inhabited islands. The amount of research needed, particularly into saving threatened species, is colossal. Unfortunately, the station has too few facilities and too few scientists. The giant Galapagos tortoise is one of the rare species most needing help. Miguel Castro from Ecuador is a warden at the Darwin station. His main task is to study the movements and habits of the tortoises in the hope that their numbers can be built up. The scars on the underside tell him something about the tortoise's travels. This one got his dents from crawling about on the lava down at the coast. There are endless opportunities in the Galapagos for research into bird behavior, especially seabirds. Like almost everything else, they're so tame. This swallowtail gull is quite undisturbed by the thought that a scientific party from the Darwin station is about to invade its beach. The invader is Dr. Mike Harris from the Darwin Research Station. He's currently working on Galapagos seabirds. On Tower Island, one of the most northerly of the group, it's the red-footed boobies which Mike Harris is studying. Boobies are relatives of the gannet, so you might expect to find them nesting on cliffs. But redfoots are the only boobies in the Pacific to nest in trees. On Tower, they use low scrub. There's little suitable nesting cover, so the redfoots have no choice but to settle down beside one of their greatest persecutors, the frigate birds. Frigates are extremely piratical. The males certainly look the part with their black wings and blood-red pouches. They pose all sorts of problems. How can they afford to lose so many chicks and eggs? The goings-on in a frigate colony are extremely destructive. Quite apart from the constant egg losses, one chick dies for every youngster that reaches this state. Frigates are superbly aerobatic flyers. It's almost beneath the dignity of the frigate to collect nesting material of his own. He'd far rather pinch it from someone else. It's only the males who boast those huge red inflatable pouches, and then only in the breeding season. They display in groups to any female flying over. Display often brings the females down from 200 feet up. The whole dazzling performance must hit them like a burst of flak. For once, the frigate colony is at peace. The only being to break the unaccustomed calm is Dr. Mike Harris, intent on his chick survey. Gradually, a little is being learned about the ways of these mysterious birds. It's part of the vital research being carried out by scientists from the Charles Darwin Research Station. It's almost as if the craggy figure of that great Victorian still presides over their work.
Well, I hope you're now convinced, as Darwin was, that the Galapagos Islands deserve very special care and protection. Darwin's connection with the islands is kept alive by the modest research and conservation program carried out by the Darwin Institute. The program has to be modest because only very modest funds are available. But if the unique natural life of the Galapagos is to survive, then our whole approach has got to be a lot more than modest. These islands are full of subjects for study and pleasure. It is certainly not an impossible problem to see that they will continue to be a source of interest and joy to future generations of scientists and laymen. Just as an example, take this albatross colony on Hood Island. They're called waved albatross from the close wavy lines covering their body features. They might just as well be called the Galapagos albatross. They don't nest anywhere else. I spent some time watching these dignified and ridiculous creatures. Look at that courtship walk, for instance. As you might expect, the male takes the lead in the courtship dance, and there is much ceremonial bowing, a sort of beak fencing match which ends up with an enormous yawn. Cutting in is severely discouraged. But it isn't so easy to quench the flame of love. When I visited Hood Island, there were several of these dances going on. As a matter of fact, there are only 3,000 pairs of waved albatrosses in the world, and they all nest on Hood. These rituals are by no means silent, but I doubt whether any other creature actually says woo while doing so. All this performance may seem rather unnecessary, but as far as the birds are concerned, it is an important prelude to breeding. Anyway, they look as if they're enjoying it. Apparently, as the couples get to know each other and get into practice, the whole thing gets more and more hectic. Young would become easy prey should any predator find its way onto the island. And the whole colony would be in serious trouble if Hood were ever disturbed. Close to the cliffs of Hood, I was able to watch another fascinating seabird diving for fish, the blue-footed booby. During the breeding season, the blue-footed booby makes full use of his bright blue feet. When it comes into land next time, watch the way it waves its feet just before touching down. Apparently, these boobies don't land like this at other times of the year, so it is obviously an important part of the display to claim its courting and nesting territory. I must say, it doesn't look as if it had any aerodynamic purpose. There's no accounting for taste, but he's obviously frightfully proud of those great blue feet. The female response calls for some painful-looking gymnastics, and after some more goose-stepping, she walks over to join me. Next, she leads him down towards the nesting site, but that isn't the end of the ceremony. Ritual demands that he make a symbolic presentation of some nesting material. Symbolic because these birds never actually build a nest. They find the bare ground perfectly adequate. The ritual must be a relic of some distant period in their evolution. Once, of course, is never enough, and like so many people with a good parlor trick, off he goes to start the whole performance all over again. It seems to me that there are three things about the Galapagos which give them a very special importance. In the first place, there are many strange and interesting creatures which are found nowhere else in the world. Secondly, it was the remarkable and unusual features of the animal population which gave Charles Darwin the clue to his comprehensive theory of evolution. And thirdly, and the thing which struck me most forcibly, as it does anyone who visits the island, is the incredible, even touching tameness of the animals there. They're fearless of man because apparently the instinct of fear takes many thousands of years to develop. We all have a special responsibility to see that in this one small corner of the earth, the creatures of these enchanted islands need never develop the instinct of fear at all.